Some of the inaccuracies that I find out there indicate otherwise and are creating unneeded fear and confusion for some of our qualified medical marijuana patients. I supported the initiative in 2007, and I signed legislation giving designated providers the same protections that primary caregivers have under state law. I also expanded the list of illnesses that medical marijuana can be used for, from cancer, HIV, MS, epilepsy, and seizures, to also include Crohn's disease, hepatitis C, anorexia, and other conditions approved by the State Medical Quality Assurance Commission. Last year, I signed a bill adding nurse practitioners, naturopaths, physician assistants, and osteopathic physician assistants to the list of health care providers who can recommend medical marijuana. These efforts have been, despite the fact, it's still a federal crime. We have provided what is within our authority, assurance to patients and health care professionals that the state recognizes the medical benefits of marijuana and they will not be prosecuted in state courts. However, possession and use of marijuana, medical or otherwise, can still be prosecuted in federal courts. It wasn't until 2 years ago that in the Ogden memo by the U.S. Department of Justice, they said that they would not use their limited resources to focus on seriously ill individuals who use marijuana in compliance with state law. Yet that same memo by the Justice Department pointed out that they maintained the authority to do so. The legislation brought forth this year by Senator Jeannie Cole Wells is an attempt to further clarify the extreme complexity that we find around the use and availability of medical marijuana, and to give those patients and providers appropriate protections under the law. So I want to thank Senator Jeannie Cole Wells for her leadership on this issue, and I want to make it clear that I stand with her in her support and her intent to resolve these unsettled issues. However, as I told her and the people I've met with on this issue, I cannot approve the bill in full. My foremost concern is that a number of provisions could put state employees at risk of serious personal consequences. I've shared my concerns with Senator Jeannie Cole Wells and Representative Cody in the House as they and their staffs started to work together with us on a rewrite to address those concerns. But the legislative process ran out of time, and the bill that was passed by the legislature was the original bill that did not address my concerns. I have been and remain willing to fashion a bill that promotes better access for our patients without putting our state employees at legal risk from federal enforcement. And I remain open and would very much like to work with the legislature to establish a confidential registry of medical marijuana patients to prevent unfounded searches and arrests of these individuals under state enforcement. Unfortunately, the registry provisions of the bill are intertwined with other provisions that I could not approve, so further work is absolutely necessary. Several of the portions of the bill will stand. I have kept sections of the bill that preserve Initiative 692's affirmative defense from state prosecution for patients and those who assist with the medical use of marijuana. I have kept sections of the bill that provide additional state law protection from civil and criminal penalties. Parental rights may not be restricted solely due to the medical use of cannabis without showing impairment in the performance of parenting functions. Qualifying patients may not be denied an organ transplant solely because of medical marijuana use. Medical marijuana patients and their providers may grow cannabis for their own use, designate a provider to grow on their behalf, or participate in a collective garden with other qualifying patients without fear of state criminal prosecution. But the central concerns that I have raised still stand. We cannot assure protections to one group of people, our patients and our providers and our healthcare professionals, in a way that subjects another group, those who work for the Department of Health and the Department of Agriculture employees, to federal arrest or criminal liability. That is not acceptable to me. It is not workable. Some have predicted that the federal government would not arrest or prosecute state employees. Yet the two United States attorneys in Washington state were very direct in telling me that state employees performing activities under this bill would not be protected for civil or criminal liability under federal law. The bill's sponsors asked me to get this position in writing, and the letter that followed reiterated that position. Specifically, the U.S. attorneys said, and I quote, "State employees who conducted activities mandated by the Washington legislative proposals would not be immune from liability," unquote. Their letter followed closely other signals that the landscape is changing out there. In February, a U.S. attorney notified the city of Oakland that an ordinance there was contrary to federal law and would open marijuana growers to prosecution, even if such activities were permitted under their law. This week, the U.S. attorney in Colorado reiterated this same position. Just this morning, the U.S. attorney in Rhode Island did the same. Similar letters are pending in other states. In early February, the U.S. attorney for Eastern Washington notified landlords of dispensaries that they could face penalties if those dispensaries remained open. The federal raids in Spokane yesterday are an indication that we need to take the U.S. attorney at his word. Let me clear up the confusion and the misperception that I've heard following these raids. Some have erroneously claimed that this bill would prevent the federal government from taking the action that they did yesterday. That is not true. No state legislation could prevent that action. The U.S. attorney has reiterated that this morning. State law does not trump federal law. Some have argued and urged me to sign the bill anyway and assert states' rights. But I have to ask, is it a state right to violate federal law? Is it a state right to put employees at risk of federal prosecution? The state has the ability to decriminalize medical marijuana activities as a matter of state law. That is the right that is asserted under Initiative 692. As governor, whose number one priority is the well-being of this state, I cannot disregard federal law and our two U.S. attorneys on the chance that state employees may never be prosecuted. What do you say to them if they are? What would you tell that employee? No responsible business or other employer would put their employees in a position of being subject to federal law enforcement actions, and I will not either. What I will do and what I have done is pledge to work on a solution that does not come at the expense of our employees, but will protect our citizens. I remain open to legislation to exempt qualifying patients and their providers from state criminal penalties when they join in nonprofit cooperative organizations that produce, process, and distribute medical marijuana. I also remain open to legislation that establishes a secure and confidential registration system to provide patients with protections from arrest and seizure. Ultimately, the state is limited in its ability to address these issues. The real change lies with and must be made at the federal level by the federal government. Thank you. With that, I'll take a few questions. There are 15 states now that have medicinal marijuana. As chair of the National Governors Association, I've asked those 15 to come together to discuss what we should do in light of all these new letters from U.S. attorneys. One of the suggestions I'm going to put before them is that we should change the category of medicinal marijuana from a 1, which it is now, which is not allowed to be prescribed and dispensed by pharmacies, to a 2, which would allow it to happen. The process, as I understand it, is through the U.S. Attorney General. He's delegated authority to the DEA, and based on a finding by FDA and Health and Human Services that it is for medicinal purposes and that it does help patients, that would be binding on the U.S. Attorney. So that is a suggestion I intend to make to my fellow governors as a process that we all ought to lead to ask if there isn't a federal solution. In the meantime, because that can't happen overnight, I still think there's work to be done here in our state to help these patients get access to medicinal marijuana.
During this special session, are you trying to come up with language this session for a bill, or is that next year?
No, I took the action I did today, knowing full well I could wait 20 days to allow the legislature to bring me a bill that meets my concerns so that I could still sign a bill this session. Let me be clear, many of the provisions in this bill didn't take effect 2013 anyway. But I have spoken with Representative Cody and Senator Jeannie Cole Wells this morning. I've spoken with the 4 leaders because we made an agreement going into special session that it was only necessary to implement the budget, and anything outside of that would require a five-corner agreement. I am open to particularly reestablishing the registry concept that was present in the bill, but I'm open to working with the two of them to see if we couldn't get something done this session. That's why I'm taking action today.
What's left in this bill that's of value to those with the issues of needing medical marijuana?
Well, as I mentioned, clearly criminal and civil penalties are addressed. Some of the abuses that have gone on out there are addressed. Cooperative grows are allowed. Studies that were important to Senator Jeannie Cole Wells are left in the bill. So it is a much pared down bill. I don't want to mislead anybody, but I have left what I could. The rest of the sections, even the one I wanted to save, the registry, I couldn't because it was so intertwined with sections that implicated state employees to federal prosecution. I didn't feel I could save them.
Regarding the letters?
Yes.
Why did you wait until recently to ask for an opinion? And secondly, did you talk to Jenny Durkins before sending your letter asking for advice?
What happened is when I just became aware of the Oakland letter late, but then how I became aware of it is what happened in Eastern Washington. When the U.S. Attorney in Eastern Washington indicated that those dispensaries there were illegal and that he may take action, that's when I started telephoning, calling both him and Jenny Durkin, both of them, and then I got the both of them on a conference call. I then met with Senator Jeannie Cole Wells and Representative Cody to indicate what we had discussed in the phone call. They really were discouraged by the fact that state employees could be put at risk, asked if it could be put in writing, and so I made the formal request that it be put in writing. I do not. No.
Do you think the raid in Spokane was the timing of the raids in Spokane yesterday? Do you think that was a signal from the feds?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them. The landscape is changing. Let me be clear. The landscape is changing. You don't just get the letter that happened in Oakland and call it a day. That one was early February. Then the U.S. Attorney in Eastern Washington made it clear that in his press release that he intended to take action. We asked for an opinion. Colorado got an opinion. Rhode Island got an opinion. New Jersey is going to get an opinion. The landscape is changing out there. And so the U.S. attorneys are now reinterpreting that Ogden memo of 2 years ago and restating the fact that they are not going to prioritize prosecution of legitimate medicinal marijuana patients. But anything beyond that, they are not suggesting they're going to stand down. They're suggesting, in fact, they have the right to enforce, and they very well may, and these action by these raids are an indication of that.
Some cities were looking for clarity from the legislature on this, and they think in the absence of a new law, the dispensaries are illegal. Do you think that under the current law, dispensaries are illegal?
You'd have to look at them, and there's nothing that locals can't do. Locals maintain their legal authority to zone, to take action. There's nothing. They wanted, as I understand it, to have something uniform throughout the state, and that's why they were relying on this legislative session. But there's nothing standing in the way of the locals from taking action.
But is there anything standing in the way of them not taking action? In other words, should the cities be cracking down on these dispensaries?
I leave that to them. When I met with them, they are a divided group. Okay, there are some cities who wanted me to sign the bill in full. There are many cities who wanted me to veto it in full. So there's not unanimity among the cities.
They're confused about state law in some cases, and they don't know whether, and some think that dispensaries are illegal. Do you think that they're right about that?
There is nothing in state law that says dispensaries are legal. That's why Senator Cole Wells stepped up to introduce this legislation. That was in part what she was trying to do. I'm vetoing that section because of what it would take state employees to do. So there still is nothing in state law.
Governor Gregoire, responding to your questions about legal immunity for state employees, federal prosecutors said on April 14th, quote, potential actions the department could consider, end quote, would include civil fines or criminal prosecution. But the same day, you issued a statement that said, quote, the department would prosecute, end quote, those involved. And those are very different statements. Why was your statement dishonestly representing what the federal prosecutor said?
Whatever the federal prosecutor said, I stand by. I've not intended in any way at any time to be dishonest about their representation. They did not at any time make a commitment to me, I will prosecute anybody. They made an absolute commitment to me that they are free to, and that they would not grant, nor could they grant, any immunity to state employees, and that they would consider them instruments of criminal activity, and thus they would be vulnerable. That was the conversation I had with them. That was really in disbelief by many. The legislators asked me to get it in writing. They put it in writing. Please don't mischaracterize what happened here.
Are you gunning for a job in the Obama administration?
Please. This is not about anything extraneous to this. This is about me being governor of the state of Washington. I will not subject my state employees to federal prosecution, period. I will not. I think that's irresponsible on my part. I wouldn't expect anybody to do that. So that is the clear reason for what I've done today. It has nothing to do with me, my future, or anything else. This is exactly what I think is the right thing to do from my head and my heart. And in my heart, I want to get something done because I believe these patients are entitled to protection. And I want them to have medicinal marijuana that they need and deserve. But I want it done right, not at the expense of putting state employees at risk of federal prosecution. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying today.
Were those your only concerns? Employee liability, were there any other major concerns about the bill?
That's the number one concern, and I shared that after my conversation with those two U.S. attorneys with the legislators. Prior to that, I was encouraged by the bill because I know there are problems out there. But then when I began to see the vulnerability to state employees, I had to take a major stop and say, this isn't the way to do it. There's a better way to do it.
Is there a way that the state could write legislation that makes dispensaries legal?
Under state law, sure.
We have time for a couple more questions, special session or otherwise.
I'll come back from the U.S. attorneys. Would you have signed the bill?
You know, we'd be in a different spot today. That's a fair question.
Are you concerned about what this might lead to a marijuana issue on the ballot this year?
If it does, it does. No.
Are you aware of any state officials that have already been arrested in states that have licensed dispensaries?
No.
No one has been arrested on a state official who works at who is licensed at a dispensary in another state that does that? My second part of my question is...
Let me be clear.
Yes.
Let me be clear about what I'm trying to get you to understand today. The landscape is changing. Okay? So the fact of the matter is Colorado may have had it one way for some period of time, but the fact is they now have a U.S. attorney's opinion that's saying you better start rethinking what you're doing. That is the changing landscape that we're in. Now, when is that going to settle out? I don't know. But to me, ultimately, we need to get the change at the federal level, which I am prepared to talk with my colleagues and to try and initiate that to happen. But that isn't going to happen fast enough for us, and that's why I think we should.
What I wanted to ask as well is these initial letters from the federal government to California, I thought those were in regards to 4 football field-sized industrial grow operations. I thought that was what started the Fed's entire excitement about what's going on.
I don't know. You know more than I do.
The size of operation they're concerned about?
You have the letters as much as I do.
1 week into the special session, the House hasn't even convened yet to vote on any bills. Are you concerned that they can get this done this session? There's talk already from folks I've heard. They're already thinking a second special session is going to be needed.
I'm not interested in a second special session. I'm not interested in going 30 days. Progress is being made. I have met with the leaders on more than one occasion this week. I've met with the 4 corners on the budget this week. There's been an exchange of an offer from the House. One will be expected from the Senate today, and the House will go in session on Monday and pass bills necessary to implement the budget. They are identifying all those bills that are necessary for them to implement the budget that they could pass in advance of a budget agreement. So they're making progress. It may not be visible to you on the floor, but I know good progress is being made. I've been able to negotiate some things in the last couple of days to get rid of some roadblocks that I know that are important to get us going and get us out of here. Hannah.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, that's our live coverage of Governor Christine Gregoire in Washington State and her statements on the veto or partial veto of SB 5073. This, of course, was the bill in Washington State to legalize a registry card system, legalize dispensaries, a few other changes that she mentioned, like transplant protections, which are great, and parenting rights protections, which are fabulous. But the big part there, the dispensary protections, she claims that she cannot sign that bill in good conscience because she'd be subjecting her state employees to federal prosecution.
Right. And I want to say, too, that, yeah, I've been criticizing her a lot on Twitter right now, and I'm happy about that transplant thing, you know, because it affects me personally. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is how many transplant patients are on that medical marijuana program, and how many state employees are there going to be who are at risk, she says, versus the amount of patients.
Yeah, she's very, very concerned about the state employees who might be facing federal prosecution. Meanwhile, there are 5 dispensaries right now in Spokane where we've got people who are currently serving patients. The patients, Governor Gregoire, that you say you're so concerned about, they're currently serving those patients, and they're going to be facing federal prosecution. So you seem to be really concerned about covering bureaucrats' rear end, but not so concerned about taking care of the tens of thousands of patients in your state who need access to cannabis. And to say that you're afraid for the state employees, that question at the end was absolutely perfect. Have you heard of any other states and any other medical marijuana states where state employees have been prosecuted to this point so far? No, none, not a single one. But she wants to say, oh, the landscape is changing. Well, you want to know why the landscape is changing, Governor Gregoire? Because you're turning tail. You're tucking your tail between your legs and refusing to fight for the people that elected you. You're refusing to fight for the sickest and most vulnerable among us. You're getting scared by a couple of letters. What are you supposed to say to a state employee who might get busted by the feds? What you say is, we've got your back. We're going to be to court with you. Our attorney general is going to fight this. We're going to fight for states' rights. We're going to fight for people's rights to use their medicine. And we're going to fight to keep the DEA out of our states. Maybe that would change the landscape if we had a few brave governors that would stand up to this. You know, Governor Richardson in 2007 got the same exact threats when he was legalizing medical marijuana in New Mexico through their legislature, the same threats when they were setting up a system that would have state-run dispensaries, a state-run system that has to audit and give out the exact same thing you're worried about. And when someone brought it up with Governor Richardson and said, aren't you afraid? Aren't you worried about what might happen to your federal employees? And he goes, well, sure I am, but it's the right thing to do. And that's as simple as it gets, Governor Gregoire. You are the leader. You are the leader of your state, not the follower, not the lapdog of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and not kowtowing to Gil Kerlikowske and Barack Obama in Washington, D.C. It's Washington State you need to be concerned with and protecting the people that elected you. I just saw your re-election chances die in that press conference right there. I just saw Dino Rossi rubbing his hands because he knows he's going to be elected over you if he gets to run against you a third time, or was it second time? I'm not sure. But I sense your electoral chances plummeting in the state of Washington. To talk out of both sides of your mouth like you're all about the patients and you support what they put together here, and then they ask you the simple question, well, do you think the dispensaries that exist now are legal? And all you can do is say, well, the locals this, the locals that, it's up to the locals whether they'll prosecute. How about some leadership? How about some backbone from the governor that says, as far as we're concerned, dispensaries in Washington State are neither legal nor illegal. What we've got going on here where, and again, I've brought it up many times about the idea that you're a caregiver for 30 seconds for 100 people at a time may not be exactly what the intent of the law was, but it's the letter of the law. It's what's written down right now, and it's what people are using as a workaround to get medicine to sick patients. Let's get right down to the meat of this, whether or not they're breaking any law or whether they're not following the exact intent of what's going on. What's the most important moral thing to do here is to get medicine to sick and disabled people. And that's what's happening, and that's what the federal government's trying to shut down, and that's what you're being a complacent lapdog and helping them do. Governor Christine Gregoire, shame on you. There.
That was one of as a patient and a citizen of the Pacific Northwest, that was one of the most insulting fucking things I've ever seen.
It's insane. And folks, if you want to catch the replay of this, we're recording it here on our Stickam channel, so you can go to our video links at live.normal.org. I broke into it like maybe 30 seconds after she started, so just about all of it is there, plus this rant here at the end. You can catch that at our Stickam channel, live.normal.